Hello, friends. So I am attempting here to make to share a reflection about Lent, perhaps once a week here. And so you may be wondering, wait, what is Lent? And so I shared a reflection in Spanish, and within Spanish-speaking cultures, there's a lot more familiarity with Lent or Cuaresma because of our Catholic roots, and I know that not everyone who speaks Spanish has Catholic roots, but we're a lot more familiar with those practices. I think if you're predominantly an English speaker and you didn't have interactions with Catholicism, maybe you don't know what Lent is. Now, Lent is not a Catholic practice. Lent is actually practiced by numerous Christian traditions. It's an ancient practice. It's a time to deepen our reflection and our desires, our focus with God. It's a journey towards death and resurrection. And so it leads us to Holy Week, to Good Friday, and to Easter. And so it's an intentional way to create space to remove habits and unhealthy practices that may be hindering your relationship with God, and to renew or begin new practices and rhythms of life that help you draw more attention and attend to the presence of God. And so God is always present in our lives. God is seeking us all the time. I think the challenge is that we become unaware, distracted, or we have an inaccurate image of who God is or where God is. And we've done a lot of work in the last few years talking about that, how we have this a language and a perception that God is a faraway, distant God who left, and we're just doing his work until he comes back. And that's inaccurate. God is always at work. God is always at work in God's mission. And so we are not doing the work for a distant God. We are joining God in God's present work in redeeming humanity and all creation. And so that imagery gives us a more biblical imagery, let's say, of the present, living, and active God. So anyway, we've done some of that work, and we need to continue that. But Lent, I think, helps us to be more focused. And so what I want to share with you is a reflection from the Gospel of John, because we may or may not have a reflection like this once a week. Let's see how it goes. So, in John chapter 1, I'm going to read that and then share a thought here in the context of Lent and spiritual formation. Chapter 1, verse 1, it says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has not been made. In him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. There was a man sent from God whose name was John. He came as a witness to testify concerning that light, so that through him all might believe. He himself was not the light. He came only as a witness to the light. The true light that gives light to everyone was coming into the world. He was in the world, and though the world was made through him, the world did not recognize him. He came to that which was his own, but his own did not receive him. Yet to all who received him, to those who believe in his name, he gave the right to become children of God, children born not of natural descent, nor of human decision, but of a husband's will, but born of God. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son, who came from the Father, full of grace and truth." John testified concerning him. He cried out, saying, "This is the one I spoke about when I said, 'He who comes after me has surpassed me because he was before me.' Out of his fullness, we have all received grace in place of grace already given. For the law was given through Moses, grace and peace came through Jesus Christ. No one has ever seen God but the one and only Son, who is himself God, and is the closest relationship with the Father, has made him known." What I want to focus and share here briefly is how the Bible clearly lets us know who John the Baptist is. John the Baptist is not the light. The gospel lets us know who Jesus is. That Jesus is the light. And in John 7 and John 8, Jesus proclaims and reveals himself as the light of the world, which we've covered that in another time. But I want to share here, oftentimes we, in an unintentional way, for various ways and reasons that we're not going to get into right now, we start taking on this savior complex, right? Where it's up to us to save the world. And so we have this interpretation out of the Gospel of Matthew that we are the light of the world. And so here you are the light of the world. And, Matthew is teaching us that, but it's talking to the community. The context is different. But I think somehow in our individualistic, self-centered way, we reduce that teaching and put that title upon ourselves, and after a while we burn out. And so I think this is a healthier take here that Jesus is the light, but you and I are not the light. Now, we are to be witnesses, faithful participants, I would say, of the life and mission of the living God. And so we can reflect the light, but the light is Jesus. And I think Lent helps us with that. It helps us know who we are and who we're not. One of the blessings that is received during Lent is that, remember that you were dust, and to dust you shall return. And so there's an awareness of our limitation. But at the same time, there's an awareness of who God is, of God's invitation. And so this may be helpful to us, right? Because many of us in different ministries, youth and college ministries, we have taken on this savior complex that we already know we don't want. It's not healthy, but for one way or another, it's still part of our DNA for now. But I think Lent, again, helps us to know, hey, I have limits. I have boundaries. I need rest. And there's something healthy about that, right? And we still have the healthy and beautiful burden of being witnesses. We still have that calling, that invitation, that commission, that responsibility, which it's healthier when we understand that we are not the Savior. We are not the light, but we can be faithful servants to the Savior. And so all of that sort of comes into play. So I'll close with this. Well, how does that encourage you to know you are not the light? How does God speak to you? What does God say to you? How does God minister to your needs? How does God meet you where you're at as you acknowledge and know you are not the light? How are you informed about the presence and the faithfulness, the grace and the truth of God by acknowledging that Jesus is the light? How does that bring you peace? And we can think about John the Baptist. John the Baptist was not a passive, absent, spiritually out of touch, disengaged person, which oftentimes when we talk about, letting God be God and us being who we are, some people bring up sort of those excuses and mental blocks. Well, that means you're not going to care. That means you're going to make bad decisions. And it's all fear-based. But the truth here that we find is Jesus is always at work. Jesus is the light. And so again, take some time to think about that. We are not the light. Jesus is the light. And we are called to be faithful witnesses of that light. So anyway, those are some thoughts here that are running through my mind and my heart, and I wanted to share those with you. So consider adding some practices in this season of Lent that help you be more aware and be more attentive to the presence and faithfulness of God.